President Obama had strong words for Russian President Vladimir Putin over Russia's actions in Ukraine following a meeting of G7 leaders in Brussels. That's a meeting from which Russia was excluded in response to its absorption of the Crimean region. RT's Paul Scott has more from that summit.
So the G7 concludes here in Brussels, minus Russian President Vladimir Putin, who showed no signs of bitterness after not being invited. When asked how he felt about a lack of invitation, he simply said bon appetit to those who were sat around the table. But all eyes now turn to France, where the Russian president will be present as the world leaders gather to mark 70 years since the D-Day landings. And there's plenty of intrigue around this to see how the Russian president will be greeted. It's the first time that the international community have been together like this since relations have deteriorated and since Russia was suspended from the G8. And perhaps relations haven't been helped by announcements here at the G7 over the last 24 hours or so. The G7 countries have ratcheted up the pressure on Russia, demanding that they do all in their power to de-escalate the tensions in eastern Ukraine. The 7 leading industrial nations saying that Russia should prevent what it calls, or what they call, militants crossing the border from Russia into Ukraine. If they fail to do this, then the threat of further sanctions is very real, according to British Prime Minister David Cameron.
First, the status quo is unacceptable. The continuing destabilization of eastern Ukraine must stop. Second, there are a set of things that need to happen. President Putin must recognize the legitimate election of President Poroshenko. He must stop arms crossing the border into Ukraine. He must cease Russian support for separatist groups. And third, if these things don't happen, then sectoral sanctions will follow.
Well, amid the calls for de-escalation, President Barack Obama also spoke of the possibility of Washington training Ukrainian police and military personnel, while NATO have also confirmed that they are going to increase cooperation with Ukrainian authorities. And President Obama acknowledges, however, that Russia has legitimate concerns.
Russia has a legitimate interest in what happens in Ukraine, given that it's on its border and given its historical ties. But ultimately, it is up to the people of Ukraine to make their own decisions. That Russian armed forces annexing pieces of a neighbor is illegal.
Well, President Obama was also asked for his take on the Scottish referendum coming up later this year, and he says that the will of the people should decide. However, that slightly contradicts his take on the referendum in Crimea. He described that as an annexation and a military intervention. That's despite the fact hundreds of thousands of people voted in favour of a return to the Russian Federation.
With respect to the future of the United Kingdom, obviously, ultimately, this is up to the people of Great Britain. In the case of Scotland, there's a referendum process in place, and it's up to the people of Scotland.
Well, Obama says he has no plans to meet personally with President Vladimir Putin on Thursday, but Russia's representative to the EU says that the number of European leaders prepared to meet the Russian president is on the increase. For example, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, British Prime Minister David Cameron and French President Francois Hollande are all set to meet with the Russian leader one-on-one. Francois Hollande is even having 2 dinners, of course, one with Obama and one with Putin, in his attempt to try and keep the leaders at bay. So perhaps there isn't quite a united front when it comes to isolating Russia.
That was RT's Paul Scott.